enrichment there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Hi there, I'm your host, Kat Meyer. I'm so excited for today's episode because we are talking about astrology, one of my favorite subjects, and specifically debunking the idea that someone's sun sign indicates compatibility. A focus on astrological compatibility may lead individuals to dismiss potentially fulfilling relationships based on predetermined notions. Closing oneself off to someone who doesn't align with a specific astrological profile can result in missed opportunities for genuine connection, personal enrichment, and shared growth. We're talking with my friend, Sara Q, who enlightens us on the best ways we can utilize tools like astrology and tarot for guidance, insight, and personal growth, and better relational connection and understanding of one's partner. On a separate note, Valentine's Day is approaching, and we are offering 25% off your first purchase of Head South intimacy products when you use the code VDAY. This offer ends on February 7th and is not valid on bundles or merch. You can check out the Head South products on our website, headsouth.world. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Sara.
Hey, Kat.
Thank you so much for being on Head South Radio.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you, but before we get started, I wanted to do a few icebreakers.
Okay.
Even though we know each other, we've known each other for quite some time. Yeah, quite some time. I'm going to say around 2017-18.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably about right.
Mm-hmm. But I'd love to do a little icebreakers to warm us up. And so my first question for you is, who is your fictional character crush?
Fictional character crush? That's such a hard one. Maybe Parker Posey's character in Party Girl.
Okay.
It's like a little bit of a combo of like, I want to be her, but I also have a crush on her.
I think that's usually how it works with like fictional character crushes, is like there's part of you that wants to be that person and also part of you that is like enamored by that person.
Yeah.
And then my next question is, if there was a fictional place from a book or a film that you would want to live in and visit for 24 hours. So not live in for the rest of your life, but just visit for 24 hours. Where would that place be? Yeah.
Ooh. Oh, this is so simple and basic, but I think Wonderland from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. That would be a really fun place to check out.
That would be amazing. I was watching the Pottery Throwdown, which is like a HBO kind of British bake-off, but for pottery.
Okay.
And the big challenge was to make an Alice in Wonderland themed tea set. Wow. And it was so cool because all three of the competitors created very different versions and like very much of their reflective of their personality and their skill set. But each one was like, I'm obsessed, because that's one of my favorite stories is Alice in Wonderland. And it was once like a big theme for me. Like I used to have like the stuffed animals on my bed, the book by my bedside. I've read it a few times. Okay, so then back to the icebreakers. What are your top three zodiac? Like what is your...
Oh, my placement?
Yeah, your placement.
Yeah. Okay, so I am a Virgo sun, but then I have a Gemini rising and an Aquarius moon. So I'm a very airy Virgo.
Okay. Do you find that you, like what your chart reads is very accurate of yourself?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I identify with Virgo very much, but then I think there's a lot of like Virgo slander, also a lot of Gemini slander while we're at it. But I think especially, but like especially in the queer community, like trying to date on Lex when I was single, it would be like, you're a Virgo, and then they just drop off and don't talk to me.
Oh no!
So I always try to say, oh, I'm a very airy Virgo.
You like have a little disclaimer.
Yeah.
On the side.
But I definitely identify with, I have like a perfectionistic streak that I'm constantly fighting because I know it does not serve me. I'm very hard on the people around me, but not as hard on them as I am on myself. That's definitely a Virgo trait. I'm very service oriented. That's usually what people say about Virgos.
Very organized.
Very organized. Yeah.
Yeah. My experience with Virgos is very organized, but Virgos are big dreamers that can then execute and get things done. Like, so it's not so like lofty dreams and then like nothing happens from that.
Yeah.
It's like lofty dreams, but like they have the organizational skills to make it happen, or like know how to like make it happen with like the right people. I have found Virgos are nice to work with, in my opinion. Like
because
colleagues.
Oh, we're going to show up on time. We're going to like get done what we need to do,
Yeah. Virgos are productive people.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes I'm too productive. I have to remind myself, take a rest.
Coffee or tea?
Both. Am I allowed to say that?
You're absolutely allowed to say that. Yes.
I work in tea. I think we'll get into that soon. My day job is tea, and I got the job because at that time I was not drinking any coffee. I was like a total tea fanatic. I'm like, it made my life so much better. I was like an evangelist for tea. Everybody stopped drinking coffee. And now in my job, I partner with so many coffee shops, and all my customers are like, oh, Sarah, you have to try this. We have this new seasonal drink, or we have this special roast from Ethiopia that's been fermented. You would love it, And so I started tasting a little here and there, and that got me back on coffee. And now I probably drink coffee as much as I drink tea.
You've gotten lots of beverages.
All the beverages.
All the beverages. Would you rather shop for sex toys or lingerie?
Ooh, I think sex toys. Yeah.
Would you rather tie someone up or be tied up?
Oh, definitely tie someone up. I've only been tied up once and it made me very uncomfortable.
So not your jam. But
is that a Virgo thing too? I'm like,
that
get me out of here. I have no control.
That absolutely might be. I would actually love to do a survey of that, of like getting people's astrological signs and then kind of people's would you rathers when it comes to sex, and figuring out like, oh, a lot of Virgos like this, or a lot of Geminis like that. A lot of Geminis like both.
I'm on board.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun survey to do. Last one in terms of icebreakers. Would you rather have morning sex or late night sex?
I think night. I'm a night person.
So then tell us about Sara, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and a little bit about who you work with.
Sure. So I am Sara. We named my signs. That's probably the most important thing. I'm also a dog mom to a rescue Jack Russell named Dolly Parton. I'm a beverage professional by day. We alluded to that a little bit. And I guess a witch by night. I don't really label myself that, but people always label me that. I'm always the first one that people come to when they're like, what's happening in the stars? Like, why is everything so weird right now? And I also read tarot cards. So I do that for folks, really anyone that approaches me. But I've been working a lot lately with like the queer community specifically. And I've donated some readings through Body Hack and various other events and activities.
Cool. So to get started, we had a little pre-interview conversation. And one of the topics that came up, and the reason why I wanted to bring you on the podcast is especially for your, knowledge of the cosmos. Like, Sara, what's happening? I know I've DM'd you about that many times. You've also pulled cards for me as well. And so I wanted to bring you on to talk about relationships in astrology, because I think as astrology, obviously, I think we're all aware of it's trended up immensely. Like in the 10 years since I kind of started getting into it, it's become a whole industry, I'm going to say.
Absolutely.
Like products, merchandise, it used to be like in my family, like someone would read the zodiacs in the newspaper every so often, like not religiously, but like someone would be like reading the comics and then throw out some of the zodiac stuff. And then 10 years ago, started getting into it when I started working in the city, and coworkers were mentioning things like the first time I had ever heard of like return of Saturn and or Saturn's return. I was around that age. So I was like about 27.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then that's when I started getting into astrology, was when someone explained Saturn return to me, as well as Mercury retrograde. And then
Yeah.
since then, I'd never heard those terms before. And then all of a sudden, it's everywhere. It's on sweatshirts. It's on mugs.
Yes.
It's the reason people don't show up for work now. It's like a lot of things. And so with that, I wanted to bring you on because I think a lot of people have now started using apps like CoStar and The Pattern and Channy. And like you said, in dating, online dating, and people, like, that's one of the number one questions I'm assuming people ask when you're
Mm-hmm.
online dating. And then people start determining whether or not, like, it's such a red flag, green flag at this point of like certain people's star
Yeah.
signs. And so you and I had a little conversation around the fact that, like, and I'd love for you to speak to this about debunking compatibility when it comes to astrology. So that's my first question.
Yeah, that's a massive question.
Yes,
That's
sorry.
so real. I mean, I guess to start off with, I do like it as a question with getting to know people, just because if it as a question, whether you are interested in astrology, whether you think about it, whether you believe in it, these type of things. I like it because it tells me something about how the other person and I will get along. So that's just as a very baseline. If people are telling me, oh, it's fake, it's all made up, especially cis men saying that, I'm very apprehensive, and it tells me that we're not going to have a lot in common, and they're perhaps not a very fun person. So I don't know if that's too aggressive, but there's that. And then beyond that, I think a lot of people think about just sun sign to sun sign compatibility, and it'll be kind of like, oh, well, she's a Virgo and I'm a Sagittarius, so we'll never get along. Or, she's a Cancer and I'm a Leo, we're complete opposites, or something like that. And that's so simplistic, and it doesn't really take into account the entire chart, which could be more telling in terms of compatibility and whether you get along or not. But third and finally, and then we can circle back on any of this that's interesting to you, the chart doesn't determine the person, right? Our life experiences do, our traumas, our previous relationships, our jobs, where we live, what all these different things. Sure, they might be informed by our charts, but they're never going to tell you whether you have a spark of chemistry with a person or not. Having some type of emotional or intellectual or sexual connection with a person has no bearing on their signs, So I try to encourage people not to, do a full chart or get too deep into that before getting to know a person, just like in real life, and chatting with them, and even for myself, it's been kind of a growth process where I used to be pretty rigid about that. And with my current partner, I didn't even pull our synastry until we had already been together like 6 months. And I only did it because they were away and I missed them. I think otherwise I probably would have even gone longer without doing it, and I've just found it to be a lot healthier of a connection to get to know them just as a human before getting to know their chart, right?
I like that. I like the delaying that, because I find it like with astrology, there's areas of it that are just like tools for understanding.
Yes.
So having these little hints or like affirmations or validation around certain things versus like using it as a way of judging, criticizing, and kind of determining things.
Right.
Instead, it's more of like, it gives you insight. And it might not, because exactly to your point, like sometimes it does not accurately align with that person, the chart reading or their chart, how they interact with the world just based on their human and their personal experiences. And so I loved when we talked, you described it as like, it's a tool for self-exploration and actually shouldn't necessarily be used as a compatibility confirmation.
Yes.
And so what aspects or placements in a person's birth chart can provide insights into their communication style and emotional expression within a relationship? So rather than looking at it as like compatible, not compatible, like I always get those ads on Instagram of like,
oh my gosh, I know.
Leo, bad, like that kind of stuff. But I think to your point, it's like if there's more aspects and placements around certain things in terms of relational wellness that people
Yes.
should maybe be curious about or kind of understand a little bit more about themselves versus using it to investigate somebody else? Like, we don't have to be Sherlock and try to figure out
Right.
and like decode our partners. Cause I've noticed
Yes.
that too, is a lot of people will use the chart and try to decode behaviors of their partner from reading a chart versus like just asking the partner like, hey, why do you do that?
Exactly. And like
Right.
as a shortcut to like pursue a relationship further or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yes.
I have people, I'm going to talk about tarot and astrology a lot and just
Mm-hmm.
want to say up front, they're obviously very different things and very different mediums, but I'm just interested in both. So it comes up. And I have the same thing with tarot cards where someone will say, oh, I don't know if I should stay with this person. Will you pull cards for me? It's like, that's not what it's for. Again, it's a tool for personal exploration.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like your question. And I think there are a couple of placements that would point sort of directly to communication and emotional wellness within not just romantic relationships, but all relationships with people. And I think, you know, the most satisfying or probably the most healthy use of that would be to look at your own chart and think about kind of like how you present in the world and what you bring to these connections rather than, you know, trying to squeeze somebody's birth time out of them and figure out theirs, you know, which I've done before. I'm not going to lie. I have done it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, yeah, again, just as a tool for personal growth and self-understanding and sort of thinking about what your needs are in a relationship and then, you know, finding out if the person you're interested in can meet those needs rather than checking if their chart will fulfill the needs somehow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for communication, the biggest thing is Mercury, and like Mercury retrograde is this huge buzzword, right? And so I think a lot of people are familiar with Mercury. It's thought to rule technology, travel, transportation, and then the biggest one is communication. When we think about the planets as having certain traits or characteristics, I think we know a good amount of them just from sun signs. Again, that applies to the other placements as well. So the things we were talking about of Virgo earlier, a Virgo Mercury would probably be very methodical and organized in their communication, and they'll be hopefully very direct with you. And they'll be, you know, kind of service oriented and like organized about what they want to say. Whereas somebody with, for instance, a more watery placement might not be as direct. Their communication may be more emotionally influenced. And, you know, an argument between those two is not necessarily going to be very fruitful unless you know how you're approaching someone else and like what you're bringing to the table. And then in terms of emotions, obviously a lot of different things will influence that. But I think the most common thing we talk about is the moon. And the moon placement is usually your feelings, your inner self, maybe the parts of you that you don't necessarily present forward in the world, but kind of, you know, come out in lonely times or maybe dark times. It's your shadow side. It's all of those things. So, you know, again, like we were talking about how the sun sign doesn't represent everything about a person. It's like the sun and the moon are these two placements that are kind of working together to, you know, show the full breadth of who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm. And then what role does Venus play in all of this? Because I feel like Venus is something we think of and associate with love and beauty. And so how does that play out within our charts? And how does that kind of manifest with certain signs that you can kind of call to?
Yeah, definitely. And there's been, I don't know if people have been hearing it, but there's been some Venus, we just had a Venus retrograde. And there's been a conjunct recently. So if you've noticed, like there was a whole rash of celebrity breakups and divorces right around the end of summer. Some people think that's because of the Venus retrograde. Yeah, your Venus placement is what you like and what you want in love and relationships. I found out that mine is Scorpio. And for the longest time, I thought it was something different. And I couldn't figure out why I wasn't in alignment with, you know, how I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be looking for. And I was trying so hard to be like the chill, laid back, cool, you know, it doesn't bother me. And then it was actually very freeing to find out that the Scorpio Venus placement is very committed and very loyal, and they want, this like real deep connection and like a fast and deep connection and all of these things. And it was just sort of like, okay, I can just be who I am and I can just name my needs and say what I want. I don't have to pretend to be something else. So that was like helpful for me to learn. And I think that's one way to use it in your sort of day to day or in your dating life, is to figure out, and again, like whether or not it's aligned, right? Like maybe you've had different experiences that sort of change the way you think about relationships or what you're looking for. And like, you don't have to do what your chart says you have to do, right? Like that doesn't make sense. But perhaps it will tell you something or give you some clue about yourself that you didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about Venus is it's not just relationships. It's also, I mean, when we talk about love, it's not just partner love, it's also self-love. That's really important. And I know some of these tougher Venus transits, to be following them is very validating and very freeing, because sometimes I'll feel like, oh, I look so ugly today. I hate all my clothes. Like I'm doing everything wrong. And then to just see it's a different planetary influence on Venus that's happening currently, it's kind of like, okay, this is going to pass. It's not me. There's an explanation for it. I can let it go. And it's also money. So it's like Fridays are the day of Venus. That's a great day to look at your finances and set up your budget. Like we already know it's a great day for dates, but it's all those different things you can kind of utilize the planetary influence to be more productive or, be more thoughtful in that area of your life.
Can you dive into that a little bit of like the week and the planets and a little bit of how that kind of each planet and each day of the week and what that influences and how that can influence our relationships? Or maybe like,
oh, interesting.
To your point of like Friday is a good day to look at your finances. So maybe that's a good day to talk to your partner about finances.
Yeah,
conversation.
I would say definitely. Mm-hmm. I don't know them all off the top of my head. I'm going to consult a resource.
Of course.
The resource is one of my favorite books, Astrology for Real Relationships by Jessica Lanadue. She's one of my favorite astrologers. And I'm pretty sure she has it in here. But like one of the big things is like we already mentioned Mercury retrograde a few times. And for anyone who's been living under a rock and they don't know what that is, it's basically when the planet appears to be moving backwards in the sky, and it's thought to affect all the things that I mentioned earlier: travel, transportation, communication. So if you find, there's a few days in a row that you're always missing your train, and, you're sending the text that you just meant to draft and you weren't ready to send yet, or you're getting into fights with people over something that you didn't mean to, like just a miscommunication, that could be what's happening. And we were talking about the Venus retrograde, right? And so that's sort of when you're re-examining your self-image, you're sorting through your finances. Maybe you have an unexpected expense or something like that. Maybe you're re-examining the way that you relate to people and your intimate relationships and what you're looking for. So some of these longer planetary occurrences are worth taking into consideration. I feel like people used to think I was absolutely bananas when I would be like, oh, I'm going to wait and have this conversation after Mercury retrograde. And now I think that's pretty common knowledge that, people will not want to make a big move or a big decision or have a big conversation during Mercury retrograde.
I can add to that with Mercury retrograde. And I think something that was helpful for me is because I remember that, like I said, 10 years ago when those, like Mercury retrograde was like such a big thing, like a discovery for me. And then also like I said, hearing it everywhere, but it wasn't just hearing it on like Instagram and social media, but I would be in a meeting. And now that's becoming a thing of like being in a meeting and people being like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, let's revisit this. Or, I think also to say this is like, yes, there's a level of like, let me pause on that. But sometimes like life happens, we have to function. So you can't stop the presses.
Yeah.
But I will say that it's good to then cross your T's and dot your I's during those periods. It's like, okay, you might not be able to avoid this conversation, or you might not be able to put off signing that contract or, filing for divorce, like whatever it is that you're dealing with at that time or booking that flight. Life has to happen, but it's also a reminder of like, well, instead of rushing through or instead of getting frustrated when like the computer freezes or it crashes twice, like having the knowledge and understanding of like, oh, this is what's happening right now. So like maybe give myself a little more patience with it. Maybe don't have the same expectations I normally would when Mercury is out of retrograde. It's kind of just adapting.
Yes.
And being able to still function. So it's not a matter of like everyone who is learned of astrology is like hiding under their bed during Mercury retrograde. We're all functioning humans. And so
No. But I'll tell you, I always give myself a little like 30 extra minutes if I need to get somewhere. If there's anything important I need to say, I think about it a lot more than I normally do, which honestly, it's a good practice in life in general, right? To not rush through everything and to just kind of give yourself some time. But a lot of astrologers talk about like the re's, like it's a good time to review. It's a good time to refresh. It's a good time to research. It can be really useful, right? And it's like, we do need those moments of pause and reflection in order to be able to move forward to the next thing.
Did you find any more intel about the days of the week?
Okay. I have the days for you. So Monday is the day of the moon. So that could be a good day for therapy. It could be a good day for like journaling, shadow work, reflection, things like that. Tuesday is Mars. So Mars is the planet of fucking and fighting. It's ambition, it's aggression, it's the ego. So it could be a good day for those things. Or if you need to start something, right? If you need some motivation, need some like wind under your feet. Wednesday is Mercury. So again, that's that communication, the technology. Maybe if you need to do, write a newsletter, or if you want to go live on social or something like that, or even just having a conversation in your personal life. Thursday is Jupiter. Some astrologers think of Jupiter as the planet of luck. It's really the expander. If you have positive things happening, it's going to expand that. But if you are, in a dark place, it will also expand that. So it's a little bit of a tricky one and to say exactly what to do with that time, but it's something to consider, right? Like, what do you want more of in your life? That's when it would be a good time to go forward with it. Friday is Venus. So, love, money, self-image, presentation, beauty, all that kind of stuff. Saturday is Saturn. Saturn is known as the taskmaster. So it's a great day for just getting stuff done. If you need to get organized, if you have to take care of errands or like chores around the house. And then Sunday is ruled by the sun. So that's very much, how you step out in the world, putting your best foot forward, like very open and living and doing what you find the most joy in.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. That's helpful. I think it's helpful for people to understand all of these different aspects of astrology. So and like use those tools to apply into their lives. Let's take a quick break. Back in 2012, I made the bold decision to ditch traditional shampoo, and I've never looked back. How did I do it, you ask? With Hair Story New Wash. This product is not just a shampoo or conditioner, it's a unique all-in-one solution that gently cleanses your hair while maintaining its natural balance. No more harsh chemicals stripping away your hair's vitality. Hair Story New Wash uses a carefully crafted blend of essential oils, aloe vera, and fatty acids that cleanse and nourish your hair without any of the harmful stuff you find in traditional products. Here's a little secret. I used to work at Hair Story from 2013 to 2017, and even after that, I couldn't find anything that compares. This is a product I truly believe in, and that's why I'm excited to share it with you today. As a listener of our podcast, by using the link we've provided in the episode notes, you'll get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase of Hair Story New Wash. Say goodbye to the shampoo bottle clutter and hello to healthier, more vibrant hair with Hair Story New Wash. Click the link, enjoy the discount, and give your hair the love it deserves. Now back to our episode. And so speaking of that, using a tool, I wanted to talk about tarot because you kind of mentioned it earlier, like that's another practice that you work with. And so I would love to understand how someone can use tarot for their like self-exploration as well as understanding partners or using it within relational context, if at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think whenever I have an appointment with someone, the first thing I say usually is that I don't use tarot as a tool of divination, right? Some people do, and that's fine. But to me, it's going to just show you the energy that's around you right now. And you get to decide what to do with that. I think sometimes with astrology, tarot, with anything kind of, abstract and esoteric, we get a little bit, we feel like it's fated or it's definitely going to happen. And I just feel like we all have agency, and maybe we don't always have the best choices or the best options that we want, but we do have a choice in every situation, So I like to start with that for tarot. And I think the most useful way to use it for growth and self-reflection is not to ask really direct questions like, does this person like me? What's going to happen tomorrow? Or anything like that, but sort of more, what's my best next step towards the goal I'm working on? Or, I'm feeling uncertain about this relationship. Why am I having these questions? Or, what's going to be the theme for my upcoming month? What should I be reflecting on and focusing on? Personally, I pull one card every week, and I use that to kind of meditate and reflect on and try to apply the themes of that card when questions or issues come up for me. It's not so much like, I'll give a real example from my life, right? I got the 7 of Pentacles this week, which is kind of commonly thought to be about taking a break from your hard work. So it is very literal because I worked last weekend and I didn't really have a break and I just worked straight through. But I'm also trying to apply it in a less literal way and think about, what is my relation to labor? What am I working for? What are my broader goals? And, if I'm taking this pause, using the pause to think about, what am I working towards? Rather than just being like, oh, good, the card aligned with what's actually happening in my life.
I like that. I like the idea of the tarot kind of being a tool for curiosity. And so kind of helping you explore and ask questions to dive a little bit deeper versus like, that's the answer. It's not necessarily the answer. It's the stepping stone to getting more curious, if that makes, because the answer, I believe the answers are within you. Like to your point,
1000%. Yeah.
of like someone coming to you and being like, am I going to marry this guy? Is like not the question. It's, energetically, where am I at in relationship or, that sort of thing. And then it's more about posing the questions and using that as a little bit of a guide.
Yes.
Am I understanding that?
Absolutely. And I think in our previous call, I gave you my opinion about that. If you're coming to me to ask about a relationship, then that's your first sign it's not a good or healthy relationship, because you're coming to a complete stranger on Instagram as opposed to your lover,
Yes.
Which I get it. It's hard, right? It's hard. You're spot on with that. And another, I didn't say this in the beginning, but former librarian, another book recommendation I have is Tarot for Change by Jessica Dorr. And she's super well versed in tarot, but she also has a background in therapy. And she's very well versed in all different methodologies. And she pairs every single card, even the minor arcana, with sort of different like exercises and philosophies and, thought processes and stuff like that. So this is a really good companion tool for my kind of like weekly self-exploration. And like I noticed ACT therapy was coming up a lot in a lot of the different cards that I was pulling. So the next time I had therapy, I told my therapist I want to integrate some of these practices because there's something about this that keeps coming up for me. Like, what is it that I need to learn more about? And what do I need to explore with that?
Oh, cool. I love that. How did your therapist respond to that?
She is an absolute peach. She found me like a million different worksheets to go through. And I think kind of the guiding question has been about values. That was sort of the common thread, is defining and identifying my values, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot and kind of going back and forth on. And, so it was nice to see that reflected.
And then just before we got on this call, so we had our pre-call maybe about 2.5 weeks ago. And we had discussed talking about gender and astrology because there is a lot of, we actually connected about this because you posted a book I think it was called like Sexual Astrology. It's
Yes.
old school book, like 70s artwork. I responded to you because I also own that book. And I think you were like traveling in the Midwest and came across it.
Yes.
And I had to like find it on like thrift books, which is usually where I source most of my books, is either thrift books or going to a used bookstore. But I had to like, I put myself on a list for it to come up because it was like out of print and not available. But it's very funny because it's like very like early 70s, free love, hippie time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the language is based on that. So that's kind of what queued up our conversation about having you
Yes.
on as a guest. But since we spoke in our pre-interview about gender and astrology, you shared with me and disclosed before this call a book you've come across. So I'd love for you to share that book and now like kind of also share why we aren't going to be discussing gender and astrology.
Yeah, sure. And maybe we can do a check-in later when I'm like more have my thoughts together. But I'm also the founder of a book club called Reading Rainbows, and we read all nonfiction and personal growth books through a queer lens. So for this month, we're reading Gender Magic by Ray McDaniel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about just exploring your relationship to gender and thinking about ways to live differently and to kind of get away from the binary a little bit. And it's mainly geared towards trans and non-binary folks, but it is for everyone. They also had a really interesting life where their parents were evangelical puppeteers. So the book is just peppered with all these fascinating stories about their upbringing and their life. And it makes it really, really fun and engaging. It's not so much of like a straightforward, self-help type of book. But there was a section in there that brought me right back to our conversation where the author, who is themselves non-binary, and they're also a sex educator and a therapist, and they were talking about sort of the way that certain traits get gendered as a very lazy shortcut and like not very thoughtful. I find that does happen very often in astrology circles. I mean, with the tarot too, like classic tarot interpretations, if you pull a king, that means an older man is coming into your life. Well, why can't we be our own kings? Like, why don't we have that within ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the book just made me think a lot more about these kind of archetypes and, maybe whether these type of conversations are productive or not. And, even if they are within kind of radical or progressive circles, that maybe they're still just reinforcing the gender binary under the guise of astrology or mysticism or anything like that. So like I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't have a fully formulated opinion about it yet, but it's shifting the way that I am thinking about these concepts in relation to astrology.
Mm-hmm. I appreciated very much you disclosing that before we got on, because it was a part of the conversation. It was, some of my questions were based on gender and astrology more specifically, because I think that's what a lot of people, he's a Gemini man, you're a Leo woman, or, Cancer men and things like that. Like people
Mm-hmm.
have opinions on certain astrological signs and gender. So that was going to be a part of our conversation, but I appreciate very much your transparency and your ability to recognize that like you don't feel like you can authentically answer some of these questions at this juncture as you're kind of working through and trying to understand and break down some of your previous thoughts that we had shared on our call. And so I think that's so important for people to know. And that's why I wanted you to share that. Like we could have not included any of this, but I wanted you to share that because I think what's very cool about that is that we're constantly evolving, constantly learning, and also have the ability to question and rethink how we view things.
Yes.
Or our opinions are changeable. They're not set in stone facts. And so gathering materials, hearing other people's thoughts, changing our perspective is such a beautiful human thing and ability that we have that sometimes we drop into such rigidity. And I love,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of this, everything that we're doing in this podcast is about questioning and understanding. And so I love the idea that you're like, I actually am coming across new material, so I am not as informed as I would like to be to speak to this material right now or to this subject matter. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to do, to express, because we could have either never, like, not addressed this and been like, we weren't going to talk about that. Or you could have come on and spoken to it, but with inauthenticity in your own
Yes.
heart or in your own mind. Or, yeah, I think it's really, I appreciate you so much for disclosing that and being willing to kind of speak to where you're not comfortable or like not sure. And I think that's okay. And we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier of like, it's okay to not have all of the information to form a full opinion, to then have the ability to articulate that. And it's also okay to ask for some time to kind of process some of the new material, some of the new information to then further your decision. We don't have to be so reactive.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is like, you're like, I'm just thinking through this. I don't,
Yeah.
some of my opinions are changing, but it's also kind of changing the lens. So it's like, this opinion might still stand, but I'm kind of rethinking it or, working through whatever that is. And so, is there anything else you'd like to share about that experience that you're kind of reading and kind of working through?
I mean, just that, well, thank you for that. And yeah, I never want to get to the point where I'm not humble enough to say, I'm not sure, or, I said something, I misspoke before, I misunderstood before. I'm really committed to being a lifelong learner, and Kat knows I'm just constantly reading all the time. And I'm always open to my ideas and my thoughts and my feelings evolving. So that exact chapter in the book, I was like, oh, I got to tell Kat about this.
Yeah. I'm very excited to read this book as well. And Sarah, because you are such a librarian, I would love for you to share with us all the books. You can email myself and Isis, our producer, and we can add that list to your episode details, because I think a lot of people, you made references to three or four books. And I think people would really appreciate kind of having those to find and read and kind of dig in a little bit more. As we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share about yourself and your work, or is there anything that we missed?
I don't think so. Just, thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun, and it's been really fun to see your project grow.
Thank you. How can people find you?
The best way is Instagram. I'm on there all the time at Supernatural Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Or for more professional things, if you're looking for beverages and not astrology, I'm also on LinkedIn, Sara Q.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you very, very much.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me, I'm heading south. All year round, I'm going down. Now you know where I'll be, I'm heading south. So come on, look me right